Hey, I'm Dylan. I'm Scott's son, also known as Jack Dillard in the Joe Dillard series.
Hi, I'm Kody. I'm Scott Pratt's daughter. And I would be Lily, but there are some. She is me and she is not.
And I'm Jess. I'm not related, totally normal person, and I'm reading these books for the very first time. This is Scott Pratt versus Joe Dillard, the podcast, a behind-the-scenes look at the best-selling Joe Dillard series. Episode 3 of the podcast, we read part 2 of part 2.
Right.
And I will say that this section was very plot driven.
Yes.
So way less character driven than part 2A.
Mm-hmm.
Part 2B has been much more plot driven. There's a lot that happens in this 100 pages. If you're reading along with us, there's a lot that happens in these these 100 pages that we read, and so we're gonna go through that here. Where did we leave off? Because there was a huge cliffhanger at the end of part 2A. Not cliffhanger, but like
It was a big deal.
it was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Do you want to talk about it, Cody?
I'd love to.
I've been dying
hoping
to.
you were gonna say
I was hoping you would ask me.
I mean, he got hit with another truck and run off a bridge into a lake. So that was big on purpose, not on accident. So he survived it and ended up knowing that the man who did it, John Tester Jr.?
John Tester Jr.,
John Tester Jr. would not stop if he didn't kind of make a stand, kind of draw a line in the sand. So he was like following his family, following his wife, following his daughter, I think. And so Joe Dillard decides to go to his house, as we talked about, Dad totally would have done, and kind of stake his macho claim. So he went and camped out and ended up having a physical
Altercation
with him and threatening, kind of saying,
Right. Well, yeah, he did, but trying to just be, I guess, like, it does seem a bit irrational, but he really was backed into a corner. At that point, he obviously Tester knew where he lived and had showed up at his house, and he had trying to go through the normal channels.
well, yeah, the police
and the cops
did say
had basically
no.
said,
Yeah, they can't
you
do
haven't
it.
exactly made a bunch of friends around here, bub.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I mean, he really, and it's that's a terrifying situation. That's a terrifying thing to try to imagine if you were really experiencing this in your like what extreme would you go to?
Yeah.
Well, and I can't imagine just sitting around
He was
waiting.
an extremist anyway.
Yeah.
He definitely would have. I think he would have done exactly this. I'm not sure
100%.
he didn't actually do this to somebody at some point that I just don't know about.
Yes, it would not surprise me at all.
Well, I will tell you that there's two things that I wanted to make mention of part 2B before we get started. And the first one is that I was, as somebody who's never read these books before, I was kind of anticipating the fallout of that scene happening in the second part of part 2. And it's literally never brought up.
It is not.
And so
just goes on.
I'm waiting with bated breath, hanging on the edge to see if it comes back to bite him in the butt in the third act of this book. So
I do think that's the thing with people like that, though. And that's something that Dad knew on a very primal level. Like, some people, you just have to let them know that you will take action. Like, you have to kind of shock them back to reality. And I think with somebody like John Tester Jr. that was doing that to his family, and I think Dad was always very aware of like the unspoken kind of games and currents that were going on between people that I think a lot of us aren't really like very self-aware of. And he was, and he, especially when it came to males.
Yeah.
Like he just knew, and like we talked about, like I don't know if that was the military, I don't know exactly, or if he naturally just kind of knew that sort of thing. Because me, I'd be like, I don't know what to do.
Right.
I'm gonna hide in a cave. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
But,
So I just thought that was interesting from a storytelling perspective, like, and it might just be because we left off at that spot that it felt kind of like a cliffhanger to me. So I was anticipating something more happening with it. And so that was something that caught me off guard in the second part of part 2. But then the other thing that I wanted to mention is that you guys pretty much disappeared.
Well, yeah.
You guys aren't in this section. And I want to know how you feel about that. It's very much about his work, this second part,
and
so
I
that
think,
makes sense.
Well, like his readers aren't probably
No, I know.
like, where's Jack and Lily?
What are they up to? I want to know what they're doing. Yeah, for sure. It just made me laugh because I got like halfway through the part and I was like, you know who we haven't heard from? Jack and Lily. Where are they?
Well,
but it does like the second. That's what I'm saying. Like this part's very plot driven. It's very much about his cases, multiple cases. I mean, he has multiple cases going on, so it's all about that. The personal stuff. There's some personal stuff at the end. You guys do make a reappearance at the very end of part 2, so we know you're okay. Thank goodness. But yeah, so there's not a lot of like. I would say the first part of part 2. Like, part 1 was very much a setup of the world and him and the cases and everything like that. The first part of part 2 was very character-driven, very, like, inside of his mind and where, like, what he was thinking and that sort of thing. And I think it was interesting that part 2... It is kind of interesting where we decided to stop the last episode and pick up this episode, because I do think there is actually a really hard divide of... what type of story is being told in those sections. And so I felt like I learned a lot about Joe Dillard in the first 2, episodes that we've done. And in this episode, it was very much just like, not that they're still from his perspective, so you're still learning stuff, but it is very much just about like the plot moving forward, and kind of like the twists of the cases and like what's happening with other people, I guess, in the story.
Yeah.
And maybe not so much Joe Dillard. There's a couple of chapters in there.
Well, it is kind of building up to his personal break.
Yes.
Like it's building up all the different elements to, the main character in a book always gets to like they can't handle.
Yeah, it's the climax. That they like.
Climax, yes.
And then the second act is usually, the longest part of the book, and it's kind of funny. Dad used to say this a lot, but I feel like for most writers, the first act and the third act are, relatively speaking, pretty easy. The second act is kind of where you make your hay. It's much more difficult because you have to cover, a novel typically, you're talking 75, 80,000 words, you're talking 350 pages. And that second act is obviously, you have to walk this fine line between moving your plot forward, developing your characters, sort of Dad used to call it getting the plates in the air, like getting plates spinning. And then as the book moves forward, you slowly start to bring those plates down. And obviously, as you approach the climax, you kind of hit them. Normally, it's like you have the maximum number of plates in the air, and it's can you bring them all down and bring it all home. So, I think that was a big part. The first part of Act 2, he's in essence sort of setting the stage and kind of giving you the background on the players and like this is where they are mentally. And then part B is, all right, I'm going to put them in the train and we're going to start going down the tracks and we're going to start picking up speed.
Yeah, and you kind of start to see where some of the storylines like start to intersect and things like that. And so like that's kind of like the genius, right? Like the authors that are like really good storytellers are ones that can weave the storylines together and kind of make it all make sense. So let's dive in. There's, let's see here, 26 to 42. We got some chapters to cover here. The first chapter is basically like, so this chapter is where Virgil Watterson is a total random character who comes forward as a witness who spotted Earlene Barlow. If you remember, Earlene owns what's it called?
The Mouse's Tail.
Oh, yeah, the Mouse's Tail.
Strip club.
It's the gentleman's club, the strip club that Angel, who's, being charged with this murder, it worked at. So Virgil spots Earlene Barlow on the bridge the night of the murder, and he comes forward. He hasn't. He's been hiding this fact because was secretly not supposed to be out.
Yeah.
So he was having an affair, and he didn't want his wife to find out that he was a place where he shouldn't have been. So he just never came forward, but he feels guilty. So he, comes forward, says, I spotted this woman. He describes Earlene.
Yeah, I mean, animal print.
Yeah.
All the
red hair,
all the things,
all that stuff. And the red Corvette keeps coming up, right? That's the thing.
Right.
And then Agent Landers tries to talk to the DA, Deacon Baker, about how they probably arrested the wrong person. Because after this guy comes forward, and Baker basically tells him to, bury the witness. They're unreliable. It was dark out. How could they tell? And this is kind of a big chapter because it kind of sets up a lot of things that happen later on in this section of the book.
Yeah, this is a big witness.
I thought it was interesting because they finally the way he sets up Agent Landers at the beginning of every chapter that Agent Landers is in.
Every chapter.
Is that he wakes up with another
Bill
woman
Lander.
in bed. Yeah. And so you're just ugh, it's just disgusting. Every time they open a chapter with Agent Landers, you're just oh yeah, that guy. Ugh. But I thought it was interesting that he chose to write him with a conscience. Because you kind of get in this chapter, you don't think there's anybody sleazier than Landers. And then he talks to Baker and you're like, that guy's even worse.
Yeah.
He's even more terrible than this other guy.
Yeah, Phil Landers is interesting in that way. He definitely, in that you could tell that Dad kind of just hates him almost as a character, but he also, he gives him depth, which I like. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but he does kind of go on towards the end of the section that we read. He talks a lot about just the politics and the justice system, and we talked a lot about that. And I think even Baker was part of that because he's up for re-election. So it's very much we basically have to win this so that I can get reelected. And he's basically do whatever it takes. Even if it means putting somebody innocent in jail.
Well, I think, and Dad was really good about using the justice system as a way to sort of kind of give you a quiet political commentary without preaching or getting beating people over the head with it.
Yeah.
Which I think was really smart because he's right. It actually, a lot of this stuff it's political. It's about a narrative. Then the narrative is, this person is the district attorney. Are they out there holding people accountable for the most heinous crimes in our area? And obviously, in an election, I can't imagine anything worse happening to a district attorney. But I think what's interesting, and it even can be applied sort of to what's going on in modern times, is just the idea of selectively applied logic,
Yeah.
Because it's at any point the DA can just say, oh no, that guy's not credible. He doesn't help my case. He's not credible.
Right.
It's only they are facts. What's the word I'm looking for? Exculpatory. So this would almost be exculpatory evidence, but I think it's he's just kind of shining a light on the fact that I think there obviously, just flip on Netflix, there are million cases of it. I do think that it's very common in the justice system that things do get politicized and that it is about winning and losing. It's not about what's right and what's
wrong,
real, actual justice and what the truth is. So, I thought it was kind of a clever way to sort of slip that in. And here's Landers, who is the sleaziest person in the world, and he doesn't compare to the guy who is kind of a politician.
Yeah, he's I don't know, man. I think we should take a second look at this, and he's like, nah.
Well, and the thing is that I kind of thought about when I was reading that is, I've listened to podcasts are a big thing now. Woo, podcasts, we're doing a podcast. But a lot of the ones that I've listened to expose injustice in the justice system because a lot of them are about I swear I don't want to get this wrong, but I think it's called In the Dark.
Okay,
it's a podcast here, and it's great. But the first season's about the Jacob Wetterling case, and the second one is about the Carl Feathers case, and both of them expose a lot of like the local law enforcement and what happened and why, and some of it, like especially with the Carl Feathers case, was a lot of corruption and whatnot. But what I thought was interesting looking at Landers is that you would automatically assume that it was Landers' fault when a lot of these people, which it is because you're not kind of doggedly pursuing the truth and you're giving in to the people above you.
Right.
But I do think a lot of these people, like cops and investigators, they do kind of get like
manipulated
told,
or
no, like we're not, you know. So I do think that we put some things on them.
Yeah, for sure.
That maybe aren't always their fault.
Yeah.
However, should you cave? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not in that position.
Yeah.
But it is in the same way, like a lot of the stuff with the Carl Feathers case all revolved around that, like DA's election.
Yeah.
So it's just, and that was completely separate from Dad. You know, Dad didn't listen to that podcast at the time, even though I think he did later. And he really liked it. But anyway, it just made me think of how complicated it is that somebody is really kind of maybe trying to do their job and then they get stopped.
Right.
And told, no, don't go any further.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting. And then one other thing about this chapter that was just kind of related to our real life. The guy that called Virgil Watterson, it was Pickens Bridge that he saw her on. So when Dad wrote this book, we lived on the lake, and every single day when we go to and from school to anywhere, literally to get anywhere, we had to go across Pickens Bridge. Actually got pulled over on Pickens Bridge one night after teaching dance. I was really upset, and I was pregnant. I was just trying to get home, and it was late and dark, and I got pulled over. Anyway, I
got pulled over after I crossed Pickens Bridge one time too.
They always waited for you off Pickens Bridge Road, but
I have not been pulled over off of
been
Pickens Bridge. No, I've never even driven over it. No, I haven't.
But so it's a really narrow. It's not even a huge bridge over the lake, but it's kind of one of those spots like some teenagers jump off of it every once in a while, even though it's kind of stupid because it is pretty far to the water. But every time you drive across it, if anybody, especially at night, if anybody comes across from the other way, you have to like crawl, or one of you has to stop and let the other one pass you. Like it is that narrow. So I thought that was interesting because if you want to cross at 1 a.m. and it's that narrow, and somebody not only was on it, but was stopped on it and out of their car, you would know. Like you'd remember their car. Yeah. You would see them and remember, because that'd be so weird. Yeah. Because you'd be like, what are they? Are they going to jump off? Like you would want. I just thought that was interesting that they're like discrediting Virgil. Yeah. Because I
see that's
totally
something only you guys
noticed.
would know.
Yeah.
To me, it's just a regular bridge. I don't know.
It's like it's super narrow. You had to be really careful when you were driving at night. You would totally have to stop. Like if somebody was stopped on it, I would totally be like, oh, something's weird. Yeah.
Yeah. So couple funny quick asides about that bridge. Well, the first one isn't super funny. So we had. Dad and I, at one point, had a couple scenes from the books, basically turned into art by a digital artist, and that was one of the scenes. We have this really cool piece of art that we use on some things that is the scene of Earlene, like in this print from like far away, like on the bridge with a red Corvette right there. In the dark, which is pretty cool. Secondly about that bridge, a little bit, I guess, kind of funnier one time. So one day when I was a teenager, I think I was maybe 16 or 17, me and a couple buddies like spent the day on the lake, and we kept jumping off the bridge. And that night, it was like, I don't know, it was maybe 11:30, and Dad had a few screwdrivers in him, and I was just kind of telling him about my day. We were just hanging out. And I was like, we jumped off Pickens Bridge. I did a flip. It was cool. Jumped off a bunch of times. And Dad said, he kind of sat there for a second, and then he said, I want to jump off Pickens Bridge.
Yeah, Mom wasn't happy about this.
Oh, man. And I'm going, I don't think that's a good idea. And Dad said, no, hell with that. I'm jumping off Pickens Bridge.
I totally forgot about this till you brought it up.
I mean, it's like it's almost midnight.
Oh my
and,
gosh!
Yeah,
my
they
mom, it's like a Friday or Saturday night, and he and I are doing what we used to do. We're sitting in, he called it his lounge, but it's like a little TV room where we're sitting in there probably watching the Braves or something. And anyway, my mom is madder than hell. She's like, "There's no way you were like, this is the stupidest thing." And I'm kind of saying the same thing.
Like in that water.
And Dad just all
Pitch
he
black.
ended up saying, he just basically said, "Look, I'm going. Dylan, you can either come with me, or you can just stay here and wait on me to get back."
Oh my gosh!
And I said, "All right, I'm coming." And so I take him to Pickens Bridge, and I drop him off in the middle of the bridge, and then I come
didn't
back
jump
from
with
the
him?
bridge. Hell no, I didn't
Oh,
jump
good
with him.
for you.
No, I didn't want to jump
You
with him
did.
because
Well, you'd already
he didn't
jumped.
want me to jump with him. He actually wanted me, so he told me to take the car back to the other side of the bridge, and there's a ramp where fishermen put their boats into the lake that goes all the way down to the lake. So he wanted me to go down there with the car and put the headlights there, so he knew where to swim. If that makes
Smart.
sense, because it was dark,
Yeah.
So he wanted me to take the car all the way around down to the bottom of the ramp, get almost where the water is, and have the headlights right there. So once he went into the water, he knew which direction to go.
Oh my gosh!
And so I took the car down, and he jumped off.
He had a life
And then-
vest. He did take a life vest.
well, that's at
I
least
remember
smart.
that was one of
he did
Mom's
take a life
conditions.
vest.
You can do it if you wear a life vest.
But
Because we lived on the lake, so we had,
interesting.
stuff
he
like
made
that,
it,
but-
and he was fine, and he did jump off Pickens Bridge.
That's
at,
hilarious.
I remember
almost the
Mom
same
was
hour
just
as
she was
this
just like
happened.
muttering the whole time they
Oh
were
my-
going. Just,
All right, so the next chapter is Joe Dillard meeting with Phil Landers to go over the physical evidence in the case for Angel Christian. Basically, Landers is a real jerk, which is not surprising at all. We've come to expect that from his character. And Joe Dillard kind of like slyly drops into the conversation that Virgil Watterson called him. That he didn't just call Agent Landers, he also called Joe Dillard. And so that kind of puts Phil on like the defensive a little bit because he's like, oh crap, we're trying to bury this evidence, basically, this witness. And Joe knows about it and is basically threatening to use it against them.
yeah.
I always find those chapters interesting between him and Landers because they're just kind of two like opposite, opposing forces, obviously. And it was a good chapter. I enjoyed that chapter because it kind of showed there's a couple times in the book where it kind of shows Joe Dillard's like craftiness, like the whole like the loopholes and like the all that stuff. And so I always love that when they're like when the the hero is like super clever and like turns it on him. I love that.
I'm always struck by that when I go back and read the books. Just like Dad's legal acumen, like he really was an incredible attorney. So like obviously that shines through a Dillard. Just the way he sees things, the way he can just kind of pick apart like his Landers, just kind of presenting different things, and it's like this is all you have. And like, this is why this isn't credible. This is how I'm going to eviscerate you on this. This is how I'm going to kill you on this. You know what I mean? Like, it's a lot of different things that would never even cross my mind. And the other thing in that scene that I was kind of struck by too is I've actually been in that. I know exactly the room that they're talking about at the courthouse. Yeah, the where the conference room is and the table. It's just off of what was the main court like the main courtroom at the courthouse in Jonesboro upstairs. I've like been in there with Dad before, so that actually kind of brought back a little memory.
You're like, wait a second, I know that room.
Actually, I remember that room.
One thing I was going to say about the last chapter, and this is just to me, I do think like this between him and Landers, and I guess maybe most lawyers and like certain maybe business people are used to this sort of conversation on a daily basis. To me,
Yeah.
going to battle with somebody, I don't go to battle with people.
It's terrifying.
Like I would just, that would be like such a huge like adrenaline rush and just like trying to like, Dad, I think did that a lot, and they're just like ready when they see like with a cop or an investigator, another lawyer, like you're just in conflict.
Like you definitely have to be somebody who does not avoid confrontation.
Yes, which is what
and I'm
good
very
at that.
confrontation averse.
Yes.
Yes, for sure. I would agree with that 100%. Diane Fry meets with Joe Dillard to go over information she's discovered about Angel Christian. So they're obviously that's not her real name. And they're trying to figure out who this girl is because they don't know where she's from. They don't know where she came from, who she actually is. And so she kind of discovers that she was basically sexually abused by her adopted father. And that's why she ran away. Her real name is Marianne Rhodes. And Dillard also meets with a forensic psychiatrist in this chapter who diagnoses Angel with a PTSD of some sort. And it says it's possible she could have killed him in some sort of like disassociated state of mind if for some reason he reminded her of her dad. So they kind of like this chapter kind of throws in that little seed of doubt of like, did she? Was it her? Because the whole time, like, you're pretty much like, it wasn't her.
Yeah. Like something's weird.
Yeah. But I don't think it was her. And then you get to this chapter and you're like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
If she went off the rails, like, it's possible. And he kind of has that conversation with the psychiatrist where he's like, is it possible that he could? And he basically is like, I mean, she's like 110 pounds soaking wet, so probably not.
Yeah.
But if he was as drunk as they said he was, and all like he kind of like basically makes a case for the fact that it could have been her. And so I thought that was an interesting chapter as far as that goes. Now, I did write down a note from this chapter that says the Diane Fry description is awfully specific.
I did too.
And I said the way he describes her is a Vols t-shirt, khaki shorts, and orange Converse high tops. And I have to ask, is that based on somebody?
So the way he described kind of her, I almost wondered if it was Jane Dillon, but not. I don't think Jane would wear Converses, but just kind of like the short, hairy, blonde bob, older. And Jane was very kind of like quick wit. So we grew up with Jane as almost like a grandmotherly figure.
Yeah, everything down to the Converses. I could definitely, definitely see Jane.
And she was an investigator.
I don't know where the Converses came from.
I don't know, but
it's
a
a
really
dad
great
thing.
detail because you can totally picture it.
I think that was like Jane plus mom. Like,
did your mom wear Converse? High tops?
Mom liked high top Converses,
Dad,
and totally
Dad
would
had them
avoid
too.
orange
Yeah,
ones.
like the original Chuck Taylors.
Look at you guys. That's fun.
Yeah. So I did actually write that down. I was like, is this Jane?
Well, I think so much of like, he does a really good job of describing characters because I will tell you this, like, when I read a book, I'm like a weirdo that like doesn't picture the characters in my head. Like I don't have like a visual.
I don't have a perfect picture of them either.
Like I don't have like a visual representation of like, oh, that's who I think that person looks like at all. Like, and it doesn't affect the way I take in the story. It's just not how my brain works. But the way your dad describes people, I'm like, oh yeah, I see that person. Like I know exactly who that is. Like I'm not like, there's no like leaving it up to your imagination to some degree. You know what I mean?
I think he had a gift for that because if you really look at the description, it's not. It's pretty Spartan. I mean, he gives you some details,
it's
but
like
it's not
one
like
line.
he gives you a full paragraph of description. He usually knocks it out in a sentence or two.
Yeah.
I think some of that was he probably got really good at that during his time as a journalist, like when he wrote for the newspaper.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, he had a way about it, but everybody, and we've talked about this a little bit, but I don't think there was a character in any of his books that wasn't somebody he knew or had met or just had some level of
based off somebody, somewhere, something.
Yeah, it's based on some kind of real experience.
Well, and I think that helps. Like he's obviously like describing a real person. But I think he does, like you said, like he does a good job of like getting across in like one or two sentences, but he does a really good job in the dialogue. Because I think that's really where you get the character. Like even like we talked about in the first episode with Erlene, where you're like, I know who that woman is. You know what I mean? Like, and it's because like when you read it, like you can't almost you almost can't not read it in an accent.
Yeah.
Because of how it's written. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, I know exactly what that woman sounds like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I just thought that was interesting. I thought, I agree, Dylan. I think he was like gifted in that it's like clearly, like I can totally picture that person in my head.
Well, and you're intrigued by them in a really short amount of time. Like,
Right.
she's just a little blip.
She's a little side character,
Yeah, and
but
you're
I'm
like,
like,
oh,
I want to
she's
hang
funny.
out with Diane. I don't know. Maybe watch a Vols game.
Yeah.
I'm sure she loved, like, you
Yeah,
know, I'm
she
sure
loves
it's
them.
rambunctious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And then the next chapter, Dillard goes to meet with Angel and ask her some questions to see how she'll stand up to cross-examination on the stand, right? So this is, I'm assuming, something that all lawyers do.
Yeah.
And she really doesn't do well.
No, definitely not. And I think it also shows you too, and I think it's very true, how much lawyers do train
Yeah.
their
Witnesses.
people. Like, I would
and, yeah.
never know what little body and people in a courtroom are not just regular people for the most part. Like, some of the
Yeah.
jury are, but
Well, you just don't even
you
know,
aren't
like,
looking at body
subconsciously, like,
language.
what you're taking in. Like, even, I mean, jury's made up of just normal people,
Yeah.
and you don't even know what you're reading from a situation subconsciously.
yeah,
You know, like the crossing of the arms or the
crossing your legs, anything, yeah.
or like not making eye contact, like little things like that that make you look guilty. you
Well,
know?
and that the opposite lawyer is looking for,
Right.
and will jump on.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I thought this was very telling of, one, how much your victim / witness, or even the person that's being accused, is not being their normal self when they get to a courtroom.
Yeah, they're
Like,
being
they have
coached,
been-
basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to be,
Yeah.
or else you'll just be
Yeah.
eaten alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I put something about, like, he talks very in detail about kind of PTSD, how she
Yeah.
might have PTSD, and
Yeah.
because that's something he dealt with.
Oh.
Why
That
he would
makes
know
sense.
that.
Yeah.
So
That's,
well.
Yeah, it's probably something he felt very,
Yeah.
like he could
Well,
describe very
Yeah,
well.
and definitely not the same. But
Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, one thing I was struck by reading this is, kind of like you were saying, I remember Dad, like, planning for and strategizing for trials when we were younger. And I do remember him talking about, like, he would really put his clients' feet to the fire well before they ever got anywhere near a courtroom, because he
Yeah.
wanted to make sure they could stand up to cross. And if you knew Dad, when he was in the right mood, so if he was trying to interrogate you or get answers out of you, it was really intimidating, and because he would zero in. It was like a pit bull. You know, you felt
Yeah.
like you were like you were attacked. You
Yeah.
know, so
yeah, I
and
can't
he would
imagine
do
having
that
a
with his
lawyer. Dad
clients.
is a lawyer.
Yeah,
sometimes he just
Where were
did
you?
it did it for fun to see
Yeah.
what you would do.
I swear I wasn't doing anything. So
Right.
maybe I was
But-
too.
Yeah, but it's like, you know, it's kind of to kind of a classic, sort of, to compare it to my background, like in a baseball analogy. If you could make practice, anytime you could make practice harder than a game, you're probably doing some things right. You
Right.
know, so like, he was putting them under all this pressure and breaking them down to where by the time they got in the courtroom, they were like, oh hell, this is way easier than when that dude was breathing down my neck. Like, this is cake. So yeah, that was one thing I was struck by. The other thing that was interesting that I remember from when Dad was sort of researching and was about to write this book, Angel's character is very, very loosely based on a real case and a real girl, and there were more details that Dad decided. I guess they felt like they were a little bit gratuitous, so he didn't use them. But one thing that he kept, like the discoloration in her hands, the burns from going down into like boiling oatmeal, that was real. There was a case, I don't remember where it was out of, but I do remember Dad talking about it, where a girl's parents had done that to her, and
Oh my
because of that,
gosh.
she had massive discoloration from her wrists down on her hands. And I remember being like, as a kid, being like shocked, like, oh my god,
Yeah.
like, somebody did that.
Yeah.
That people in the world do things like that,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, you know,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
but
Yeah, this
Anyway.
showed a lot of her, I think, mental
mental
turmoil and kind of how unstable. And it does make you be like, well, did she not?
It's weird.
Did she not?
It does like two things. It makes you like feel sorry for her because, and you're like it makes you feel like she couldn't have done it, but also it makes you feel like she could have done it.
Like she could have,
yeah, because you're like,
Right.
oh, she's just so like timid and whatever. Like, there's no way she would have done it. And then you're like, yeah, I don't know.
But then she's been through some,
yeah, and yeah, she just answers a lot of questions with I don't know, which is not an answer that you can put out there on the stand. And he's
well,
like,
they asked her some questions that they're very like going to bring up. Was she driving a different car the next day? Which is a very simple question. You would think.
It's a very easy yes or no, like pretty easy yes or no question. The next chapter is we're back to good old Arlene. And it's a very short chapter, but we find out basically that she's running drugs on the side through her nephew Ronnie. And it just kind of gives us a little bit more insight into what Gus, her former husband, her late husband, was into, and how Ronnie is going to help Arlene now. There's a lot of like every chapter with Arlene, it's like it does move the plot, but not really. It only ever brings up more questions. You never really get answers.
That's true.
You're always kind of like, wait, what? What are they doing? And she's like, I need your help with something, sugar. And then it doesn't tell you what she needs help with. You know what I mean?
She's just scheming all.
Like, and you're like, okay.
But you
so
always
I'm assuming
really
Ronnie's
like
gonna
her,
come
though,
back.
so you're like,
yeah, I know. So I'm assuming Ronnie's going to come back around at some point, because otherwise that chapter doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm thinking
it did also mention something that something was going to happen to somebody. Like she said, I need your help with something else.
Yes.
At the end.
Yes.
Which me
that
automatically,
was the thing that
I
was like, okay, more questions. Answers, but more questions.
Well, one other quick thing with that too, and this is one thing he kind of slow played this, but as the book goes, I feel like you realize, like, obviously Arlene has her just wonderful vernacular and like the way she speaks, and it's just, oh honey this, sweetie this, whatever. But you start to see that number one, that this woman isn't intimidated by anything. And number two, like how actually deep the well goes, as far as like she's pulling the strings, and she is kind of manipulating things that you just wouldn't even believe she could possibly be involved in.
She's like a mob
she
boss.
sort of is.
Yeah.
Well, I think you like her, so you constantly are kind of like, well, she's not evil, but then the more it goes on, you're like, well, she is kind of, but I still kind of really like her.
Yeah, but she's like she's not a villain, but like, I mean, if it turns out that Arlene did it, if we find out in part 3 that it was Arlene and she's the bad guy, that she's kind of like the bad guy you love to hate. You know what I mean? Like, you're just kind of
or
like,
you love to love.
You love to love, or Cody's over here defending Arlene. But I think too, like, to your point, Dylan, like, it kind of shows too, like, everything she has her hands in. Like, it's not just the strip club. She's also running drugs. Like,
Right.
and she maybe murdered somebody. Like, there's a lot going on.
In her own head too, she's constantly like, oh, that sugar, that da-da-da, I don't need to know about that. Like, she almost... I
We
feel
talked
like
about that
fools
in the,
herself.
Well,
Yeah,
we
but-
talked
but
about
it's-
in the
but
last
it's genius.
episode where
Yeah.
she's like, you get that, like, you get what's going on in her head, and then you hear what she's actually saying, and you're like, she's like maybe the smartest person in the room. Like,
Right, exactly. She's playing chess.
Yeah.
You know, she's slow playing this whole thing, but she's like 3 moves ahead, you know?
Yes, 100%. The next chapter, we go back to another one of Joe Dillard's cases, which is the Maynard Bush case. And that is probably the case that gets the most movement in this section, I would say. He is the guy that he went to visit in prison in the last section, who just wanted to write those letters. He just wanted to meet that woman he's been writing letters to. And he's pretty, like, accepting of his fate. He seems pretty chill. Well, I will tell you, in this chapter, or this section, he becomes very not chill.
Yeah.
He goes off the deep end.
He's a real weird extremist type.
Yeah, he's a weird guy. But he basically, so Bonnie Tate is the woman that he was writing to, and who comes to visit him in prison. And this scene, she visits him, and she agrees to help him break out of jail. and have and stay with her, which I'm like, is she the dumbest character in the book? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in her defense, Dad was. I mean, I think there are really people like this, but Maynard is another one who is very manipulative, obviously.
Yes.
But just classic sociopath, right? Just total classic sociopath, and. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like in this chapter, you kind of get to really see behind the curtain and see how diabolical this dude actually is. Because in the earlier things, like you were saying, he kind of came across like he had been defanged a little bit, and he had found religion, and he was going to accept his fate, and just like everything else that comes out of his mouth, it just turns out that it was all lies, and it's all manipulations.
100%. The next chapter is Sarah, Dillard's sister, enters a guilty plea in court. She's in front of Judge Glass, who hates Joe Dillard, as we've found out in the book.
Well, and so one story that does happen in that little part, just kind of where it's going back and forth with Judge Glass, it mentions that a woman forgot to turn her cell phone on silent. It went off, and that happened. I remember that.
Okay, so I have to tell you.
I think I was there.
I've only been inside of a courtroom once. No, twice. One for murder. No, I'm just teasing.
That one time.
That one time I was accused of murder. No, in my senior year of high school, we had a government class. And so we went to a court. I don't know why this was allowed.
You all went to a courtroom?
We went to a court hearing.
Field trip?
We went to a hearing in a courtroom and just sat in the gallery.
Oh my gosh.
And my cell phone alarm went off, and I thought that my teacher was going to literally rip my head off. Like it was awful. I was like, "What is happening?" It was like a really crappy old flip phone because we're getting out there. It was awful. So that part I was like, "Oh my gosh!" I was like, "So
yeah,
it was me."
I remember that happening. Well, did the judge go off on you?
No,
because he really did make the lady come up to the front of the courtroom, which I don't even think she was like a defendant.
Yeah, she was
and
just
literally just got her to tears.
Oh my gosh,
that was a real thing.
I do need to clear up that the second time I was in court was for a traffic violation, not for murder. I just want to clear. I was joking about that.
Okay,
please nobody come after me.
I promise.
Yeah.
Courtrooms are very oppressive places. I mean, well, I don't know. Mostly oppressive, yeah. To me, like when I've been in them, maybe it's just because maybe I'm biased because I knew how Dad felt about them. But when I'm in there, like I feel like the room is sucking the life out of me, and
yeah,
they're not built as like these.
Well, nothing good is going on. Like it's not like you're there because you won something or you did something really great. Like,
but it's kind of awful for the people who have to be in it day in and day out. Like,
hold on to
yeah, I couldn't imagine.
It always funny too because I feel like in movies and TV shows they like glamorize courtrooms, like the way they look and the way they're like.
Yeah,
it's always like this like regal government like whatever, and then you go to an actual courtroom and you're like, that's not what it looks like at all.
It's actually really pedestrian sometimes, especially when they just have like a million people being arraigned.
Yeah, and I'm sure too that like
noise.
I'm trying to think of like the ones that I've been in are like county. They're not like big. Like I'm sure if you went to like Hamilton County Courthouse in downtown Cincinnati, it would be like regal, whatever.
Yeah.
But the big thing in this chapter is that Dillard goes to her arraignment, but he's purposely hiding in the gallery in the courtroom so that Judge Glass won't see him. He just wants to see what happens because he's starting to feel guilty about, calling the police about, what happened with her stealing the car and the jewelry and all that stuff. But Judge Glass, even unbeknownst to him that Dillard is in the courtroom, wants to talk to Joe Dillard. So somebody's like, go find him. I'm sure he's in the building. I want to talk to him. And so that it's like awkward because he's to be like,
up from the pillar.
I'm here, actually. Hi, I'm back here. So they have this whole back and forth that basically ends with Joe Dillard leaving the courtroom and his sister really mad at him.
Yeah. Well, and I did wonder from this specific fight with Judge Glass, I was like, when did Dad have this fight with him?
Like, this was something.
Him, like something happening where they just didn't see eye to eye and them just going back and forth. It was just so specific.
Yeah.
That to me, and maybe it wasn't Judge
I thought the same
Judge Glass
thing.
is based on, but it probably was. Just the back and forth of it. I was like, that this 100%, like obviously not with Dad's sister, but with somebody, they got in this fight.
Yeah.
Well, and he says in the chapter, he's like, I can't stand bullies.
Yeah.
So he just calls him on everything that he says. Like he
Yeah.
asks him why.
Yeah.
He's like, that's the worst question you can ask a
Because
judge.
is that the reason? So forgive me, I did read this yesterday. The reason that Sarah gets so mad at him is basically like the judge is like basically egging on the fact that like, it's your sister, why did you call the police? Like,
yeah,
if you
even though at
didn't
the same
want-
time, he's like, why are you not asking for more?
Yeah.
She did all this. He's just
Yeah.
having a good time
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah.
But yes,
He's basically twisting the knife.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of it, because ultimately, I mean, yeah, technically he's the victim, but I do think, like in a typical situation like this, obviously the victim can really push for the DA or whoever to really try to nail whoever the
Right.
defendant is. But I do think that there are situations where a victim can kind of say, you know what, let's just kind of call off the dogs a little bit, and they take that into consideration. But
Well, that's why when he calls him up, he's like, why is this a big deal? We do this all the time. Like, you're
Right.
very obviously making this into a thing
Yeah.
because she's
But-
my sister.
Yeah.
yeah, but that's the thing too, and that's why, because ultimately, if you really get down to, ultimately Sarah's responsible, but ultimately Dillard is responsible for them being in that courtroom because he called the police. And Dad used to say this to me all the time. Do not let the government get involved in your life for any reason. If you can help it, do not let the government
That's
get
probably
involved
really
in your
good
life.
advice.
Probably is really good.
Right. And, and this is exactly why. Ultimately, if Dillard didn't want the government involved,
Why do you call the police?
he shouldn't have called them.
Right. He should have just dealt with it with just his sister. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I love that at the end he walks out and he leaves, and then this was very Dad too. He calls Lisa Mays at the end to get the scoop, who's like Judge Glass's. What is she like the? What are they called? The scribe or whatever that writes everything,
Yeah,
or
court
she's just like
reporter.
his.
Yeah, court reporter.
Yeah. So,
whatever.
but he knew everybody, so he would totally just be able
Be
to
like,
call
what
her and
happened
be
after
like,
I
okay, what
left?
happened?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's
Yeah.
like, well, she's mad at the judge, but she's really mad at you.
Yeah. She's mad at him, but not as mad as she is at you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, another thing too, real quick in this chapter that I want to kind of call attention to, and I think that we've sort of this is a consistent theme, but Dad's personality, and this is a part of Dillard that was extremely important, but it's very much a part of Dad's personality, is not only did Dad like to confront bullies, he really took it almost as his personal mission to try to actively take them down in any way, shape, or form that he could. It really was ingrained in his personality, and I think that's one of the reasons, like you'll see, it's a very common theme in these books that Dillard is not a fan of judges.
Yes.
He just considers them all like one giant pack of bullies. So, yeah, that's. I just want
funny.
to kind of call attention to the fact that that is actually very, very much based on Dad's real personality. It was. I think Cody's mentioned in previous podcasts where Dad would do things and say things and go to bat, even when it was uncomfortable, even if it was hard. If Dad was a witness to any kind of bullying, there was just no way that he was going to be able to not say or do something.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So it's the day of Maynard Bush's court date, and as Dillard and the rest of the crew are waiting for Maynard to be transported to the courtroom that's from the jail that's behind the courthouse, they hear gunshots, and Maynard has escaped with Bonnie, the dumbest character in the book, by taking out the two guards who are escorting them, and Dillard feels guilty because he helped arrange the meetings with Maynard and Bonnie. So there's a whole this kind of starts a downward spiral for Joe in the second half of this section, because I think the weight of everything just starts kind of crushing in on him. And then he does a really good job because he sets up at the beginning of the chapter these two twins, these older guys that are twins.
They're not really bails, or what are they called? Bondsmen? Bails? No. Or were they just guards?
They're deputies.
Well, Darren and David are twins
Bailiffs.
that we know. Their last names are Bowers. But
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, David and Darren.
Yeah.
And it said they're always laughing, which is totally David and Darren. Would they have told the story that David and Darren told?
Probably not.
It's like, no, I do not think they were not.
It's a little bit of a scandalous story, and if
no,
you want to hear it, you're going to have to read the book.
They're actually really professional, businessmen but they're very, they're always smiling. They're identical. They actually danced with my mom growing up. I remember them doing hip hop when I was younger, so I grew up knowing them. I wrote down this quote because, like you said, this is kind of what I think starts his really bad downward spiral. And this was something that I always found really interesting with Dad, is that even when he was kind of in his darkest places, he still weirdly saw beauty in things, but you wouldn't always know about it. It'd be kind of the way he talked or whatever. But the quote, it said, "As I walked slowly through the courtyard in the bright sunshine on a beautiful June morning in the Tennessee mountains, I felt anything but decent. I felt dirty, and I just wanted it all to end."
Like the contrast of it all, yeah.
Of, the beauty, and I feel
like crap, yeah. This is a big deal. So he kind of sets up this big conversation with the deputies, the twins, and this is funny story. They're all having a great time. They go to get Maynard, and then minutes later they're dead basically. And he runs out there, and he's got their blood on him. It's it's a very dramatic scene.
He's using his clothing to staunch
his
the
tie.
wound.
I think it says he pulls off his tie, and so they both end up dying, and he does feel very responsible, and this does send Joe into kind of a depression. And he kind of talks about it in the later chapters of just I just feel heavy, he talks about he can't, he just is nothing, he just feels robotic, he feels very much on autopilot. And I think there's, I mean, I've never witnessed that, but I could imagine that would completely alter who you are as a person to witness something like that. And then on top of that, not even witness it, but then feel responsible, because if he hadn't set up these meetings with Bonnie, then this probably wouldn't have happened. And so we will watch him struggle with that, through chapters in the book. But that's a really pivotal chapter. Dylan, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think you're reading a Scott Pratt book if you feel really, 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 really bad for the protagonist. Dad used to always say, as he was writing these books, he'd just be like, "Man, I feel really bad for him," but I've got to just keep kind of shoveling it on. But obviously I can't imagine what that situation. Dad was somebody in real life who largely he struggled with guilt. So, and I think that's another thing that kind of bled into Dillard is he's got a little bit, not of a hero complex, but he feels guilt probably for a lot of things that aren't really his. That he can't control, that aren't really completely his fault, Well,
and I think it's the first time that we kind of harken back to the first few chapters of the book where he's basically I'm done. I can't do this anymore. This is it's taking its toll on me. I can't represent these people. And you kind of you haven't forgotten about that, but now he's sucked into all these cases, and it's kind of a reminder of and this is why I'm done.
You might need to get out.
This is too much. It's just too much. I can't do it anymore. So it kind of circles back to that feeling of literally the title of the book, he just wishes for one innocent client, and obviously Maynard Bush is the most guilty of them all.
Yeah, the worst.
He's awful. So it was an interesting kind of reflection on that. In the next chapter, Earlene gets legal advice from a lawyer that frequents a strip club, worked with her late husband. Again, it just leaves you with more questions. Because she just never talks specifics. Like, you're always just, like, left, like, wondering, like, what was the second part of that conversation? Because I didn't get it. Like, you know, like, he always kind of, like, leaves her, like, mid-conversation where she's, like, just starting to get to the good stuff. And then it's like, and next chapter. So I do think that it talks a lot. It just shows, again, like, Dylan, to your point, like, she's just pulling all the strings. Like, she knows a lot of people in positions of power that frequent the strip club, and she's got a lot of leverage, and she uses it.
Yeah.
So she knows how to kind of, you know, sweetly remind them that she could ruin their lives.
Yeah. In a sugary way.
Yeah.
That rose has thorns.
That rose has thorns, and that rose is named Earlene Barlow. The next chapter, we're back with Maynard Bush. Again, even like you're like, it can't get any worse. And then you find out that once he escaped, he killed Bonnie and then goes to his mom, kills her. And you're like, oh my gosh.
It was all for the mom.
Yeah.
Like
all of it was like just to get back to his mom because he felt like his mom was awful to him growing up. And this was his payment. And I remember reading that chat. I'm like, he killed Bonnie? I'm like, oh my gosh. Like,
she wasn't even a second thought. It's like, oh, served her purpose.
I know. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't trust anybody. Oh, ugh. It's like,
sociopath used, as soon as he was done using her, he kills her. But he weirdly, though, had this, he said, well, she just ended up in prison for helping me get out anyway, so I figured she would.
So in a way, I helped her out.
Doing her a favor.
Yeah.
So weirdly, that rationality almost makes sense, but no, not really. Yeah, he's
it's
just
like,
he's
like
just
a weird,
sociopath.
like logically it does make sense, but also you're crazy.
Yeah. Well, and he knew he wasn't going to get, it wasn't really like he tried to get away. Like he wasn't really trying to get freedom.
You can have me now. He just completed the one thing he
all
wanted
he
to
cares
do.
about
This is funny.
killing
It's
people.
why didn't you fight, Maynard? I used all the bullets on my mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
like,
know,
wow.
and he's just sitting in there eating a sandwich.
Yeah.
And his like dead mom is 5 feet away. It's just this is as deplorable as humanity gets.
Yeah.
You know?
And like truly like a sociopath, like you were saying.
Well, and the weird thing is, though, like Dillard isn't as bothered by him in this chapter. And I mean, I kind of get it because he's just, well, I did my thing. Now I'm back. I'm going to die. They're going to kill me. It's fine.
Because I think, isn't it this chapter where he's like, because Dillard goes to visit him in the maximum security prison.
Yeah, which it goes way through like how much you have to get through.
Like
to
he
get
is locked
through
down.
It. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's trying to get him to sign an arraignment waiver. And he's like, it doesn't matter. Somebody's going to get to me.
Yeah, the
like
guards
he's like,
are
I'll
gonna
never
kill
make
me.
it.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to kill me. They know what I did. Like,
well, and he killed 2 guards.
Yeah, guards.
So,
like it's basically Darren and David, like the twins that you're like, nobody in here is trying to protect me from anybody
he's not really playing games with Dillard in this chapter. Like he normally is kind of like trying to be like play games. In this one, he's like, well, I did it.
Yeah.
And well, I'm gonna die. And
which is kind of like I'm accepting the penalty for what I did because it was worth getting to do it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, you really do get this like. But I think to your point too, like you don't get a whole lot of insight from Joe Dillard in this chapter, but it is because he's kind of on autopilot. Like I think he's so numb to it because of what happened that you kind of start in these next few chapters that finish out part 2. Like you aren't getting a lot of internal monologue from Joe Dillard because I don't think it's there.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. There are a lot of.
Yeah, he's almost resigned to it. Like even the thing where Glass almost reassigns him to these new charges with Maynard.
Yeah.
And he's saying, like, I'm Judge, I told you I'm getting out of this.
Yeah.
And then the guy says, well, you're either doing this or I'm going to hold you in contempt. And he's almost resigned to that. In any situation, things are going to go. In this profession, things are going to go as badly as they possibly can.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
So the next chapters, oh my gosh, like I just feel like Landers can't catch a break. So in the next chapter, he finds out that their one witness, Julie Hayes, who was one of the other girls that worked at the strip club, who was like their material witness that said they left together.
Who Erling
and
keeps
Angel.
randomly, vaguely mentioning in her
Right.
chapters, and like something's gonna happen to her,
Right.
way.
Yeah.
You know?
So it's definitely like a setup. But Julie is their one material witness that says that she saw them leave together, Erling and Angel, and that's like that's kind of the thing they're pinning it on. That and the hairs that they found on the minister, on John Tester, that were Angel's hairs, and that's it. Like, this is basically all they have. And so Julie Hayes turns up dead. And so that's kind of a big deal because now she can't testify in court.
Yeah.
That she saw them leave together. So now their case is literally hanging on by a thread. Hanging on by a hair. The hairs that were found on John Tester's body, which could have been there from the strip club.
From the strip club.
So Joe Dillard, like, basically at this point, they basically realize we got to like make a deal with Joe Dillard because we're going to lose this thing, and I can't lose this case.
And we're gonna look really bad.
Yeah, we're going to look really bad, and we're going to lose this case right before the re-election. It has nothing to do with anything but the fact that it's going to make Deacon Baker look stupid.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And the whole thing with Landers where he's got the woman in the bed and she doesn't look nearly as young as she did the night before, and he puts the sheet over her head so he
Always
doesn't
back
have to see
in
her.
Every Landers chapter.
And he's just like...
the next chapter, so this is kind of where Dillard's personal life kind of gets thrown back into the mix. He goes to visit his mom, and while he's there, it's really sad because he goes to visit her and she's really not doing well. But he kind of talks about how he uses the visits to see his mom as like kind of therapy because he knows that she doesn't understand what he's saying. So it's kind of him talking out loud to himself, trying to process everything that's happening. And while he's there, he gets a phone call and finds out that Julie Hayes is dead. And that kind of changes everything for the case.
Yeah.
And so the next chapter is when he goes to meet. So Deacon Baker, obviously Landers and Baker are like, well, we got to figure something out. So Dillard meets with Deacon Baker and gets him to agree to a no contest plea with 3 years probation for Angel. And Dillard basically is like, listen, if you do this, like, I'm gonna talk well of you to the press. You know, I'm gonna say, you know what, he did the right thing. You know, we didn't have the right person, and he's, you know, good on him, basically, good on Deacon Baker. Kind of knowing that that's what he wants, right? Like, all he wants out of this is to look good, and come out of this with his nose clean, so to speak, so that he's not like, it wasn't on him that they charged the wrong person. And it's a pretty pivotal chapter because this is, I mean, it basically effectively wraps up the case. Like, it's not going to go to trial now.
Right.
Like, this huge case that we've been preparing for in the whole book is just not going to happen. And
You know, it's too good to be true.
right.
Well,
so
yeah, I think one thing I appreciated about this chapter, and I think Dad was really good about, was kind of showing everybody how the sausage gets made.
Yeah.
And like, because I don't know what the statistics are off the top of my head, but I want to say something like 85, 90, 95% of criminal cases, criminal matters are settled outside of court. Like, there's some kind of plea bargain.
right.
Where there's not an actual trial. So, and this is kind of like, this is how it works. It's almost like it's a transaction, you know, it's a sale in a sense where the defense attorneys, if somebody has leverage and you use that leverage to obviously get the best deal, which, you know, it's funny that that in a lot of ways, that's how the criminal justice system works.
Right.
I love from the beginning,
it's
Deacon
just deal
Baker's like,
making.
let's not grandstand. Let's not play games. We have a really strong case
Which
against you. And he's like,
means
okay.
we're going to grandstand and play
Yeah.
games.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I love that Joe Dillard has like one line where he just like basically like cuts him out at the knees, like after he says that, and he's like, I know it's like something like I know your material witness is dead, or I don't know, just like something
And,
like where
he
it's just
talked
like
to the Virgil. And he brings up Virgil again,
Watterson, yeah.
Right.
And I'm just like, I love it. Like he's just no bones about it. Like he just like comes in and like I think that's what's so funny is like the difference between Deacon Baker and Joe Dillard. Like Deacon Baker is like all grandstanding, like you said, and like it's all this like drama and the flowery words and the eloquence and all this stuff. And Joe Dillard's like, man, I know this. Like,
Let's just stop right
you basically
there.
don't have a case. Like now I think it's great.
Well, it's so, and it's interesting too. You know how kind of like I was talking earlier about sort of like selectively applied logic. Earlier, Virgil Watterson, Deacon kind of has that conversation. It's like, well, maybe this guy says he saw Arlene on the bridge. This could be exculpatory, and he says, hell with that. He's not credible. Move forward. But now, it's Dillard's telling him like, you can sell this. You can sell that. Something can't. This witness dies, and all of a sudden things got even dicier for your case, and you can sell that you just wanted justice to be done.
Yeah.
That you didn't want to take a chance on putting somebody in prison who shouldn't have been there.
Right.
Yeah. And he's like, you could sell this. And he's like, okay, yeah, I can sell that.
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
You just see like him go, yeah, all right, that'll work. Yeah. Like it's like he's like the wheels start spinning of like that fits my needs. And like to like your dad's credit, like Joe Dillard's character is like you were saying, like knowing like what's the underlying thing? Like what does he really want?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like the base
it's not,
human
yeah,
needs
like
of
where
somebody,
it's like if you're up here on the surface of like the case, like you could get lost in the details and it's like what he really wants is to get reelected. What he really wants is to look good in front of the you know what I mean?
To look like a hero.
So in his dealing, he's like, you know what? I'll talk you up, man. And that was kind of the hook that got him.
I just thought this was the most telling of what he felt about the system at the time when he wrote this book. Like when all the stuff went wrong and everything happened and he got out of it. But it was when he was talking to his mom. It was like a therapy session. And it says, but you know what? The whole system is crazy. For over 10 years, I've been traveling every day to this bizarre world of lies and deceit. There's no honor in it anywhere. It's all just a sick game, and the people who win the most are the ones who lie the best. They call it the criminal justice system. What a crock. Defendants lie and cheat, police officers lie and cheat, prosecutors lie and cheat, defense lawyers lie and cheat, and judges, Jesus, don't get me started. The American legal system would do itself a great service if it could somehow execute half the sitting judges in this country and start all over again. His cell phone rang. So, I mean, like that rant
which is like how he felt.
Exactly what he felt at this time.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because obviously it sort of mirrors Dad's real life extreme skepticism, or not skepticism, cynicism towards the criminal justice system. Some of that particular rant, kind of wild. Some of the people listening to this know, some don't. A lot of that particular rant was actually ripped almost directly from the email that he sent to a client that got him arrested for contempt of court, suborning, perjury, and basically lost him his law license.
Wow. He got arrested from an email?
Yeah. That's what started the whole thing that got him.
Yeah, that's a much deeper story. But a lot of this, it really is a direct. I mean, that's exactly how Dad felt about the criminal justice system. Which this is crazy because this is somebody that has worked in it and is making a living from it for the past, however many long, 7-8 years. And this isn't like Dad's just using this as his character as a way to, sort of parrot other people's idea. Like Dad felt this way as somebody who had been in it all day, every day for a long time. You know?
Yeah. So I just wanted to. Yeah. That was very telling to me. That paragraph.
So the next chapter, they show up to court to enter the plea for Angel. So this is the big, it's the arraignment, and she changes her mind at the last minute.
Yeah.
And she says, so you're like, it's going to trial. Like now you're like, I'm like, there's too many chapters left in this book for it not to go.
It had to. Yeah. I mean, you knew it had to, but even
I
me who's read it before, I was like,
think I saw it coming from her.
Yeah.
But she changes her mind last minute and she wants it to go to trial. And Joe kind of figures out that it's Erlene.
Well, he's like, you talked to Erlene, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it kind of comes full circle because, just little questions like a few chapters before he's talking to her about this, doing this plea. And she's like, hell yeah. And there's a part of him that's kind of like, if I was innocent of something, I don't care what they brought in here. I'm saying, hell no, we're going to trial. But then, it kind of comes full circle and she ends up saying, let's go to trial.
Isn't there like a line in that chapter too where he's like, I knew, because I think, doesn't she say, she's like, I'm innocent. Like she says that.
Oh, he's like, I heard it again.
Yeah.
Those words.
Yeah.
Yeah, something.
Yeah, there's kind of ends that chapter where he's like convinced then that she didn't do it.
Yeah.
Like,
and he's convinced, he really is convinced. There are little things that here and there that maybe aren't perfect, but I don't think, somebody who had been what she had been through and experienced what she had experienced, I don't, nobody's going to hold up perfectly or do all the, everybody, they're human beings. They're not going to react the way that they're supposed to react. So yeah, I don't know. I thought that was interesting that kind of came back around because he had mentioned it before, and then she ends up saying, "Now let's go to trial."
Yeah. She
thinks you'll win.
Yeah.
She thinks you'll win.
I know.
Erlene says
and he's
you'll
like,
win.
she needs to stop giving me so many props. So that was a huge chapter, obviously, like a big turning point. And then, so Baker's, Landers, and Martin, who is Baker's assistant-ish, they're like, oh, crap. We don't have anything. This is a problem. So they start scheming ways to basically convict Angel, and they return back to their prior thought of having Sarah Dillard, Joe's sister, basically roll on Angel and just lie.
Plan B.
That Angel confided in her while they were in prison together that she did it. And that's going to be, now she's the material witness that was supposed to be Julie Hayes. And so you kind of see the setup of before, like if Joe hadn't been in the courtroom and reminded her how pissed off she was at him, that maybe she wouldn't have decided to do this. But Landers basically promises her the world. Like basically is like, once the case is over, you're out, you're free. And like, we can make anything happen, cause
and once again,
Deacon
it's not about if Angel did it.
Right.
At all.
It's how do we prove it?
It's how do we look good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the best line from A Few Good Men, which is my favorite movie of all time. I do love a good courtroom drama. And Tom Cruise goes off and he says, it doesn't matter what I believe, it matters what I can prove. Mm-hmm. Such a great line.
Right.
Because she's like, do you believe he did it? And he's like, it doesn't matter what I believe, and it's true. Like, it's all about what you can prove and whether it's true or not. Mm-hmm. It's you just need the evidence, right?
Yeah.
As proof that, which I always think that's interesting. I'm like, I don't know, like if I'm on a jury, I feel like I'm less likely to believe another prisoner's that
they get
testimony.
something out of
Like,
it.
I'm like,
that does
you
seem a
already
bit like
did
a conflict
something.
of interest.
Yeah, like I'm like, well, first of all, you're already in prison, so you're not a great person. And second of all, like you're probably getting something for this, So I don't know. I think that's interesting to me. I always found it interesting in the book that they felt like that was enough to hang the case on. Where I was like, if I'm on a jury, I'm kind of like, I'm not going to give it no weight, but I don't feel like I'd be like, all I need is the testimony of another prisoner.
Yeah.
And then I will come to the conclusion.
That's all we need.
Yeah. But the chapter ends with Landers going to meet Sarah, and she agrees. She basically is like, tell me what I need to do.
Yeah, I thought it was funny too that he slid a statement across the table to her that he had written himself, like word for word, and she kind of knew the deal, you know.
Right. And it's like she was like okay with it. It's like the hugest lie. Like it's not even like we'll let you write the statement how you think it went down. It was like, nope, here's what happened, sign it, and then you're going to testify to this in court.
And then memorize it.
Yeah, he's like, oh yeah. He's like, and then I'll leave it with her so she can memorize it for the day of the hearing. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all real sketchy. And then there's only 2 chapters left in this section, but the next one is a big one because it's Dillard having to deal with Maynard's 2 arraignments on this day. So he has 2 in 2 separate courthouses, in 2 separate counties, because of where the 4 murders occurred. And basically, like when he shows up for the second one, Maynard is dead. So he's hung himself or someone else has. He kind of alludes to that when he meets with them about the waivers. And it's very like the way your dad describes it is very like shocking. Like that's hard not to visualize how that all came out, how all that turned out. But the big thing I think for me, obviously, it's kind of like I kind of like the way your dad did this because that is like so shocking. This chapter's kind of like a 1-2 punch. Like you're like, oh my gosh, Maynard's dead, and he's like, oh, and it's like it's very graphic, and you're like, I wasn't expecting that. And then he turns around to go back to his car, and he notices Caroline's car, and she has terrible news that his mom has passed away. And like, what a punch in the gut, right? Like there's, you know, like you're already...
It's just been building and
building.
Like
it's just like, I think Dylan, you said it earlier, like it just keeps piling on. Like it's like every time he turns around, it's like,
well, he even mentions in this chapter, he says, he's like, I'm not doing well. I'm not sleeping. I'm not eating. He's like
he
picking
said,
at his
4
food.
sleepless nights.
Right. Dark circles under his eye. Like he wins his Finch appeal, and it's not like
even
empty.
Like,
he's like,
that big clever loophole that he like
that
came
he had
that
earlier
he was
in the
so
book.
proud of.
And he's like, I got a terrible
person. One thing
person.
I found interesting about this chapter was kind of the idea that there are a lot of parts about this book, or there are a lot of things that Dad wrote that in some ways he was almost like Scotty Damas in a sense. Like this, I mean, what does that remind you of in like topical times? Like the Epstein stuff that went down, you know, the guy that he hung himself, you know what I mean? And that it's kind of the same, like, and everybody knows that, you know, Maynard didn't hang himself, but nobody's going to get prosecuted for it, you know, obviously, because this guy had just killed these 2 bailiffs. So it was interesting because, you know, you see something like that, you're just like, oh, this is just fiction, you know what I mean? And it's amazing, like things like that happen in the real world. You know?
For sure.
It's very real.
Also, was it true that the Carter County Courthouse that the prison was built on top of it so they could like flood it out?
Yeah, that was like such a weird.
It sounds like a really bad idea.
Oh, so huge story with that. So that actually is exactly right. Because I've been in that courthouse several times. It smells like you can't even describe how awful it smells in that courthouse, and that's exactly why. But an interesting fact about that, Dad for a long time was hated in Carter County because he had a client who was in that jail above the courthouse. Apparently the conditions were I mean, it was like wild animals. It was awful. There were like severe overcrowding. I mean, it was just like basic human rights violations almost. So Dad actually ended up at one point suing Carter County and won and forced them to build a new jail next door. So now there's like this like 7-story jail next to it. And every time I drive by it, I think about Dad made them build that. And
Dad did that.
These people probably still hate, like they hear the name Scott Pratt and they're just like,
well, and in case
build
people
that new jail for them no good low lifes. You know.
In case people don't know that are listening to this, what we're talking about is he talks about in the book that a jail was built on top of the courthouse and
Right.
that the inmates figured out if they clogged the commodes or certain areas, they could flood the courthouse or like
Yeah, that was
literally
a really,
make
really poor
sewage go
decision-making idea from somebody.
yeah, and that they did it pretty often.
Yeah.
Because, why wouldn't they?
Why wouldn't you? You got nothing better to do.
Yeah.
You're in jail.
So apparently that's true.
So this chapter ends with just terrible news. His mom has passed away. Caroline breaks the news to him. And I think it's the section ends on a really somber note, with the last chapter of them making the funeral arrangements and then going to the funeral. It's just kind of, it's just sad. Like everything about it's just kind of like, you're like, oh, you just, what'd you say, Dylan? It's not a Scott Pratt book unless you feel bad for the protagonist. And it's like, you definitely feel bad for Joe Dillard. Like you're like, wow, it's been a sucky few months for Joe.
Well, all the things. And Dad, I just feel like Dad's life was like that sometimes. Like so many things would pile up and sometimes it was a little self-induced, but not all the time. Yeah. Joe ends up having to Caroline's like, okay, you're gonna go out.
And I'll take care of it.
And he's just not in a good place. At all.
Yeah,
he's
it's
just
clear
very
that he's
angry.
not. And she kind of like, aren't they in their car? And she's like, what is?
And he starts walking.
Oh yeah,
which was also a dad
that was a
thing.
Scotty staple.
He'd just be like, I'm just gotta walk it off.
Walk ridiculous, home,
like 12 miles
from somewhere,
or something.
just
walk,
leave.
That was his thing. That was his like flight mechanism when things just got really brutal. Dad would just get out and start trudging, almost like I don't know if you remember the movie The Knight's Tale.
Yeah,
like Geoffrey Chaucer. That when you first see him, it's who plays him? What's that guy's name?
He's great. Paul
Bettany.
Bettany.
Oh yeah,
and he's just
yeah.
he's like trudging down the road and he's naked and the guys are like, what are you doing, sir? And he's like, trudging, to trudge. It's like,
You're like, that was Dad.
The defeated walk of somebody who won't give up, but they're kind of defeated at the moment.
Yeah,
but they're not done. Yeah, that was Dad's thing. He was always that really, anytime he was upset or things were going bad or there was just things that was too much, he would just take off walking.
Yeah.
And
the worst. I always knew it was kind of bad when Mom would show, they'd gone somewhere together and Mom would come home on her own.
Where's Dad? He's walking.
He's walking home. Did you kick him out? Nope. He got out of the car.
Nah, I just wanted to walk.
He'll be here in like 5 hours.
Don't worry, he'll be here when you wake up in the morning.
Occasionally, one of us would try to go talk some sense into him.
Yeah,
It's
sometimes we go
Mom's
get
at
him.
home. You can get in the car with me though.
Or every once in a while, he'd call.
Yeah.
It'd been,
Somebody
it'd
can
been
pick me
3
up.
miles
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
I'm done walking. It's obvious that we're getting ready to launch into the third part of the book, and so it kind of ends on that somber note of the funeral. There was a line in there that I wanted to ask you guys about because it says, "Nothing seemed to give me pleasure anymore, not even music." Was your dad really big into music? Like, was he?
Yes.
What kind of stuff did he like?
Well, he not only did he absolutely love to hear music, that was his one kind of getaway that he would do at night when he had a fire, he was drinking, he always had music. And I mean, he loved blues, he loved rock, he loved country, he loved almost anything.
Dad music in a sense almost permeated his being, but he didn't just love music, he also was a musician.
Mm-hmm.
He was a drummer, he could play guitar, and he had a beautiful singing voice. So he was like a Renaissance man in a sense. Yeah, when he was in high school or late in high school or maybe right after high school, he almost was had a mini Eagles band where he was a drummer and also a lead singer.
Nice.
And he was always playing music all the way through growing up in some way, form, or fashion. But music
that's how him and
for
Mom
him
met.
was this
Or was
really
him singing
unique release.
her in the show.
Oh.
So, I mean,
music was his outlet. Anybody that knows Dad well at all or spent any time with him knows how important music was to him. And it was just, and one thing that also was so cool about him is he was very, his music taste was extremely eclectic. Like, we could listen to Kenny Chesney and then listen to Aerosmith and then listen to like 50 Cent.
And Earth, Wind, and Fire.
And
Nice.
then listen to Taylor Swift, and Dad would just be like, oh, God, I love this song. So, but music was always really, really important to him.
That's about it for this episode.
Yeah,
We've covered a lot of ground. Lots happened.
Yeah.
I know.
We're never short for words on this podcast, which is a good thing. I think it's great. I love it. So until next time, thanks guys for listening.